What's up guys? In this video we're going to review the Xcadey Xpower mountain bike power meter. So I purchased this set off of AliExpress, which can be somewhat of a Russian roulette when you buy things from them. It came out to be $375 US. That was after shipping, after fees and everything. It took about 2 weeks to get here from China, which wasn't bad at all. Communicating with the seller, I did ask about the crankset. They didn't actually have this one listed initially, but the seller was really quick, and I'll put a link down below to which seller I actually bought it from, so that way you can support them. Now, looking online, they do have road cranksets that they have available, and they look very light. They're actually only about 50 grams heavier than the super light SRAM Dub Road crankset. So really expected these to be close to what the SRAM XX1 Dub crankset is, but it actually turned out to be about 180 grams heavier, which was, you know, kind of a bummer with that, but I'm only paying $375 for a crankset with a power meter. And they also were alloy, so that way I wouldn't have to worry about pedal strikes so much as you do with carbon cranks. These were 170 millimeter crank arm length. The spider is just like their other spiders that they have available. The S series, I think is what they're called. And the pattern is actually a 5-bolt pattern, but it's identical to SRAM 3-bolt pattern. So if for some reason you want to go with a super light setup and you want to get some, you know, SRAM Dub cranks and go very light, you could take this off of this crankset and put it on a SRAM crankset later. So the power meter actually has a rechargeable battery built inside of it. It uses a magnetic charger, which is really nice because you don't have any doors or anything that you have to unscrew to change batteries, which could cause liquid or water or anything to get inside and damage the electronics. When I ran these with my Garmin Vector 3 pedals, they matched perfectly. There was no crazy spikes, nothing different from what the Vectors were doing. GP Llama has actually done a great test on just the spider itself with the road setup, and in his test it was very accurate. And initially, I know with the Xcadey, you actually had to go to their app and add a 5% increase or 6% increase on their power reading on the app. Now, when I used it, I left it at 100% and it was accurate. So I don't know, maybe Xcadey updated their firmware on their app, which may have addressed this issue. Now, as far as the app goes, it is a very simple app to use. You download it obviously on whatever app store you're using. You open it, it will connect to the power meter. It will tell you if you're in your latest version. It will give you the battery status as well. And you can change your power reading from 100% down to 90% or 110%. Really, you don't use the app much. Once you initially get the power meter, connect it, check it, make sure it has the latest firmware, check the battery status, everything looks good, then you disconnect and you really don't use the app anymore. Now, I installed this on my Salsa Horse Thief, and the spindle is actually a 24 millimeter spindle, so it's identical to a Shimano crankset. So if you already have a Shimano crankset on your mountain bike, you don't have to change the bottom bracket or anything. You just take off your Shimano crankset and throw this one in and it's fine. Now, if you are running a Dub or a 30 millimeter spindle, you will have to take out the bottom bracket and put in some sort of 24 millimeter bottom bracket. Now, the advantage of this is obviously there's tons of options when it comes to 24 millimeter spindles, and you know, they really are targeting the Shimano users with this to replace, say, XTR or XT, and if you want to go with power with your mountain bike. Now, I tested this on single track, some gravel, even on a 7-hour gravel single track ride that I did before, and it was working flawless. It was actually quiet. The power readings were accurate. Weight was not bad at all until the end of the 7-hour ride. That's when I ran into some issues. So one concern I had when I first got the crankset, this is the spindle here, which is a steel spindle. These teeth that are right here, or splines I should call them, they're not very deep. And I had a little bit of a concern with that. I was thinking that it could maybe come loose. It kind of reminds me of the old style ISIS or your square taper bottom brackets, where it's just not as refined as far as the splines go. So I really worried about that. And sure enough, on the 7-hour ride with about an hour to go, the left crank arm started coming loose, and I could feel it just a little bit, and I didn't know if it was a crank arm or not, but it got worse and worse and worse. And I stopped probably about 10 times in that last hour to tighten that left crank arm. Now, I was using a mini tool. It was tiny, so I couldn't get much leverage on it, but I was able to tighten it back down and then ride again. And I was really worried that I may damage the splines, so that's why I stopped so much, just to tighten it up and keep it from coming loose. So after a long ride, you can see here it started getting loose on me. So I don't know, I want to try to tighten it. Right now the preload adjuster is a little next to the arm here, so I'd back that out so I could tighten it later. But anyway, so you can see here it is loose, so it might have to use like a some Loctite or something like that on there to tighten it up, and then I'll report back. Now the right side crank arm I actually tightened myself, so that one was solid. There's no issues at all. The left hand side I thought would come from the factory actually being tight already, but I would recommend, if you do buy this crank set, I would tighten both sides. I would actually take off both crank arms from the spindle. I would add some sort of Loctite. You know, the blue Loctite is the one I would add blue Loctite to it, tighten it down so that way it doesn't come loose. Now on my next ride, I got home, finished the ride. Obviously I tightened that left crank arm, and then on my next ride the crankset was creaking horribly, and I would ride for about 10 minutes, and sure enough that left crank arm started coming loose again. So that was a huge bummer. I was really worried about it. I was like, what's going on? Got home and I pulled off the left crank arm. Look, sure enough, I had messed up the splines on the aluminum crank arm, not the actual steel spindle. So now my left crank arm is basically no good and it's trash. I'm going to try to contact Xcadey, see if they'll send me a replacement or let me purchase another one. But that's just, warning for you when you go with this crankset. Be sure you tighten both sides down and also use the blue Loctite. So since the left crank arm is now useless, I've taken the spider off of the Xcadey crankset. I've put it on a SRAM Stylo Dub mountain bike crankset, which is the 3-bolt pattern, and it has been working flawless with that. So if I were you, I would probably skip the crankset for now and just go with the spider. If you've already ordered the crankset, like I said before, just make sure that you are tightening your crank arms. That way they won't come loose and won't cause any damage. Now, if you do feel it start coming loose, stop riding if you can. Now, I was in the middle of nowhere, so I couldn't just stop riding. But let's say if you're on some trails that you can actually walk back to your vehicle or something like that, then I would do that. I wouldn't try to ride out of the trails with it loose, because it will ruin the crank arm. So in a nutshell, the power meter, very good. Crank arms, it could be improved. If Xcadey could just fix the splines, in my opinion, make them a little more secure, then this would be an awesome product. All right, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this review, be sure to like it, share it with any of your friends, subscribe to the channel. That helps me out tremendously, and we'll see you in the next video.